Well, having no children or grandchildren, I don't have a lot of firsthand experience with the problem with bunk beds. But I have been realizing that usually I'm walking, hiking, when I meet bunk beds. Last week I told you about the Appalachian Trail. Well, this week, as I mark a new beginning in my life with retirement, I plan to walk the Camino de Santiago across northern Spain. And every night, I'll be sleeping on a bunk bed. And what I've been told is that the old people get there slower than the young people, so they always end up on the upper bunk. This is a problem with transitions. So, new beginnings today. Now, as a personal experience go, this one didn't happen to someone else, it happened to me. And as remembered history goes, it didn't happen months or years ago. It happened in the last couple of weeks. I was with a group of clergy in a meeting. But this didn't happen in the meeting, this happened after the meeting. In fact, it happened on the way to the parking lot. Why is it, I wonder, that there is more honesty in parking lots than in churches? Or even confessionals? Could it be that there is a freedom out there that does not exist in here? I mean, in a parking lot, you're all but left. You are half gone. With one turn of the key, which is already in your hand, you could be gone. So people will say anything when they know they can leave any time. All I did was ask a respected colleague how things are going. Key in hand, he confided that they weren't going as well as he had hoped. How so? I asked, knowing that just over a year ago he'd brought great gifts to a great church amid great excitement. Well, he said, things look pretty good on paper. Money's a problem, but where isn't money a problem? The bigger issue is the people don't seem to be buying in. He went on to explain that when the ministerial change occurred, all the ministers changed, meaning 3 ministers changed. Old trio out, new trio in, which some can argue is a good way to do it. Clean sweep, whole new team, less chance for funny politics, people lining up old staff against new staff, choosing sides, gathering allies, training armies. But that's what occurred in this fella's shop. Clean sweep, no politics, good people out, good people in. But when the old team went, a ton of history went with them. Not about politics and not about practices, not even about programs, but about people. Personal history, don't you see? Said my friend in the parking lot, I've never seen so many church people walking around saying, nobody knows my story. Interesting, isn't it, that we can communicate with incredible speed, in unprecedented ways, but the only way our stories are revealed to and shared with each other is over time. This is because story sharing presumes, even requires, trust. And like Rome, trust wasn't built in a day. My colleague is a good preacher, good teacher, good leader, good administrator. His people see that in him, but they have not opened themselves to him or to the newly assembled team. Hence their lament. Nobody knows our story. Will that lament diminish with time? Maybe, maybe not. A lot of it depends on the quantity and the quality of their encounters together. Some of the people will get married. Some of the people will get buried. Some will become diseased, giving them reasons to weep. Some of them will become eased, giving them reasons to rejoice. Some will be suffering. There will be pottering. And the questions are, will his ministry place him at their doors then? And will they let him in then? This question captures the essence of my prayers in our tradition and transition. In our new beginning, there's only one pastoral change in a trio of clergy. When I retire in June, Reverend Jessica Rooks will become the lead minister of community life, joining Reverend Sally and Reverend Ryan in the lead clergy team. Only one change in a trio of relationships. However, I know that any change creates anxiety. Even though Sally has served St. Luke's for 8 years and Ryan for 4 years, every relationship will feel new. Will Ryan, Sally, and Jessica welcome your stories? Will you welcome theirs? You know, not everybody who comes to church wants to know and be known. Some people want to hide and be hid. Especially in larger churches, anonymity is one of those options that larger churches offer. And anonymity is something that all of us seek some of the time, and some of us seek all of the time. So if you have come here to lay low, be my guest. But I think it's safe to say that most people, either secretly or openly, hope that somebody in this countercultural community that we Christians call the church will welcome them, accept them, and perchance over time even love them in ways that will incarnate and radiate the love of Jesus. The very same people who with abundant breath say, "Pastor, tell me the stories of Jesus," will also say under their breath, "But Pastor, listen to mine." Which is a legitimate expectation given that ours is a relationship theology. The distant God does not remain so, but comes to us where we are, lives among us as we are, starts with the premise of who we are, before calling us beyond what we are. The Hebrew people are entering the land of promise. They have been following the way of the cairns. For 40 years, the pivotal moment has come. A new beginning is on the horizon. Now, there were setbacks along the way. In the middle, the people complained about not enough food, not enough water. The back to Egypt voices were pretty persuasive. Life was great, not great, but at least we had meals and a place to sleep. Joshua becomes the new leader, even in the midst of the tears over the death of Moses. The transition from traveling to arriving and settling in is stressful. Recent graduates may feel this way when they're thrust into the workforce. The new job brings this same sense of foreboding. The Israelites are about to occupy the land, unsure of what will happen once they settle in and do not have to live out of their suitcases anymore. 40 years before, the people crossed the water, the Red Sea, to escape slavery, running from that pursuing Egyptian army. And the stories of the Exodus are told and retold to the children and the grandchildren along that wilderness journey. Now, in the crossing of the Jordan River, they claim a new identity. The priests actually carry the story in the Ark of the Covenant as they cross. The leaders of the families pick up stones from the riverbed. And when the children ask, "What do these stones mean?" the community remembers together. This is who we were. This is who we are, and this is who we will be. An ending, a middle, and a new beginning. One of the things that I love to do, celebrating new beginnings, is to lead funerals and memorial services. That's because I tell people stories, either because I remember well or I listen well. I don't do whitewash jobs. No one needs my preaching to clean them up. God's grace and blessing will do that. But I try really hard to capture in words not only the facts of somebody's life, but the depths of someone's life. Now, I have colleagues who think that's wrong, who never do it, never get personal, who believe it's idolatry, who thinks that funerals, if they glorify anyone, ought to only glorify God. And so their funeral sermons are generic. One size fits all. Insert the name here. And if you don't know you're in the right room because you've recognized your relative sitting beside you, nothing the preacher says is likely to give you a clue. Now, whenever clergy gather, the debate always rages between the Glorify God group and the Remember Michael group. But it's not an either or, it is a both and. The book on Michael is closed. This chapter is finished. But the author of life does not necessarily drop the pen when that blood clot dropped Michael, which means that the big book on Michael is far from closed. And who can say what yet resides in the author's imagination? At funerals, I have never failed to preach the goodness and the greatness of God, nor have I ever failed to offer the promises of God. But neither have I failed to milk the most that I could and the best that I could from Michael's chapter as he lived it. Because believing as I do that Michael matters to God, and I am more than willing and at least moderately able to detail the ways in which Michael mattered to us. What occasionally surprised me in this love of mine is the number of people, some of them Michael's closest and dearest relatives and closest church friends, who actually tell me that there are things in my remembrance, in my eulogy, if you will, that they never knew and wish they had. As to whose fault that was, darned if I know. The issue is neither guilt nor blame. The issue is sadness. I find it sad that people can share the same table year after year after year, or the same pew year after year after year, and know so little about each other. Why should I be left to tell you at death the things that you could have learned from each other in life? Now, while you're pondering that, let me close this reflection on stories and stones with a remembrance and a question. When I worked for the Rocky Mountain Conference, I traveled the 4-state region, and Bob and I worshiped together at a local congregation here in the Denver area. And one day, when we were after worship, I had an afternoon engagement, and I had to leave the sanctuary quickly. So I went out through the back door, through the choir room, trying to get to my car. I said to one of the women of the choir, as she was putting her robe away, long things, you know, that they... I very much appreciate the anthem from the morning. And she said, well, I hope so, because that's it. I said, what do you mean? And she said, that's it. I'm hanging it up. She was hanging up her robe. I said, are you retiring? I mean, she'd been in the choir 103 years, or at least I thought she was retiring. And she said, no, I'm quitting. I said, you're quitting? And she said, I'm quitting. You're not quitting. I'm quitting. Well, why are you quitting? Well, I sat there in the choir loft this morning, and I looked around at the other choir members, And I looked at the minister, and I looked at the worship leader, and then I looked at the ushers, and then I looked all over the congregation. Finally, I said to myself what had been haunting me for years. And I said, "What's that?" And she said, "Who cares?" Well, I was in a hurry. I had a speech to make, and so I said, "Oh, you'll be all right." And I went on to the parking lot. And all the way to my engagement, all the way through that speech, and all the way back, I thought about that indictment because I was a member of that church at that time. And she was indicting me and all of us. In fact, if it was true, what she said was, "This is not a church." Eesh. If her opinion after this long time in the community was that the sum gesture of this church was a shrug of the shoulders, then it was not a church. So I came home that afternoon and I called her. I said, "I want to talk to you." She said, "If you want to." I said, "I want to." So I went over there and we talked and we disagreed. I finally said, "Well, what would we have to do to show that we cared?" And this was her definition. She said, "Take me seriously." Which was a strange way to put it, especially for her, because she was kind of a comic. She was a kind of a peppermint stick kind of woman, always playing practical jokes. She would pin the tails of the choir robes together with safety pins. She would come in early and put a big cartoon in the pulpit so that when the minister came out in all of his sobriety, he would look down and just be blown out of the water. She was that kind of person, and I said, "You can't be serious. Take you seriously? What are you talking about? You're always joking, laughing." And she said, "You bought all that?" I thought it was rather transparent myself. I like to be taken seriously. And when I left the woman's house, I said to her, "You're wrong, you know." She said, "I'm not." I said, "I travel to churches all over the Rocky Mountain region, and everywhere I go, there are people who care for each other. They take care of each other." And she said, "Where?" I said, "Everywhere I go, there are people who care." She said, "Really?" I said, "Yes." And she said, "Name some." She wants names. May I use yours? May I use your name? Thank you.